Didn't I tell y'all that I have the best subs on the internet? Thanks for tuning in to Hard News TV4. I'm your host, Terri Lynn, and this is the channel where truth is like archaeology, and every day we're digging for it. Today is September 14th, 2020. And so a while back I did a video on the Atlas of Surveillance, and I showed just how surveilled we are in the United States, and I showed that the entire state of Tennessee is covered, and that's just predictive policing. The blue dots are predictive policing. Here's the legend over here. And when I add all the other aspects of surveillance, you can see just how surveilled the whole United States of America is. Tennessee is covered with surveillance. So I had a subscriber comment today on one of my videos, and it said, Terri, you showed us on a map that Tennessee was the heaviest surveilled state. After that, I came across an article. This family has a lot of acreage, and one day they found tiny cameras in trees on their property, so they took them down. Next thing you know is they are getting arrested in their own home because they took the cameras off the trees. The police put them on the property just to try and catch them doing something wrong like hunting. The government seems to have the right to put cameras on private property and spy on anyone they want. This is one messed up world we live in. Okay, so I went and Googled it. I had not heard about this. So I went and Googled and I found this, and it's from April 15th, 2020. This has 600,000 views on it. This is a lawyer here, Institute for Justice. So I went and looked up Institute for Justice is a non-profit libertarian public interest law firm within the United States. It says Terri and Hunter Hollingsworth own rural properties along Big Sandy River in Camden, Tennessee. Their properties are their sanctuaries. It says officers from the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agencies routinely enter private land on a whim to search for potential hunting violations. So let me show you. Okay, federal law permits them to put up cameras and trespass on your premises if it's around the perimeter of your property and not directly around your property. Okay, federal law allows them to go on your property, through your fence, through your private property posted signs, and put cameras up on your personal property. Well, let's say you married and got 2 or 3 kids, and you and your hubby want to go out to your tent and go spend some us time and get a little bit of freaky deaky on away from the children. You would expect to have a reasonable amount of privacy on your own property. Not so. The federal government can come on your property and spy on what is going on your property. Now I'm going to let this video play, and at the 5:22 mark on their video, it says that the government installed cameras on their property. The government. So you have no right to expect privacy, but here we go. I got a little bit delay in on my computer, but hopefully it's going to start. Okay, so now I don't have sound. Y'all stay with me. We're going to fix this.
Thanks for joining me, Josh. Now that we have launched the case, I think we want to spend a little bit of time delving into what's going on in Tennessee and why we've just sued there.
Absolutely, Justin. So we represent a man named Terry Rainwaters who owns about 136 acres of pretty rural property out in Camden, Tennessee. And that's a lot of property, which means Terry does a lot of stuff on his property. He lives there with his son, he has a tenant who lives there, and he farms and hunts on the property. Now, all of that is private activity. And so Terry has put up a gate and a no trespassing sign so that people who he doesn't invite can't get onto the property. But Tennessee has decided to ignore that no trespassing sign and to treat his private land like public property.
Tell me what they're doing. I mean, what are we exactly challenging? It's called the open fields doctrine.
Right. So what Tennessee agents are doing is they're entering his property without a warrant, snooping around and installing cameras in his trees. Now, it's pretty egregious, but under federal law, at least, under the U.S. Supreme Court's interpretation of the Fourth Amendment, police officers, government agents don't have to get a warrant to snoop around and search on your private land. There's a distinction drawn in Supreme Court precedent between the home and what's called the curtilage, which is the area immediately surrounding your home, and the rest of the real property you might own. And the point of this case is to say that the Tennessee courts and the Tennessee Constitution don't follow that doctrine.
Why don't you explain to people sort of the different boundaries of the property that they may own, right? From like, a couple of feet in from the road has a different legal doctrine than 10 feet from the road versus 3 feet away from their house, right?
Yeah. I think the way to think about this is that the protected area, at least if you go to federal court, would be your home and the immediately surrounding areas. So areas that are considered associated with intimate activities of the home. So something that would be protected under a lot of federal cases, for instance, would be like your front yard, or maybe a shed where you do activities closely associated with home life that's kind of adjacent to your yard. It's covered, that kind of thing. But the rest of your property, big open fields where you might farm or hunt, even if it's fenced, even if there are no trespassing signs, that stuff doesn't get protection, at least under the federal doctrine.
And so the agents were walking past no trespassing signs. How far into the property were they planting these cameras? And I think a lot of people are going to feel like this is just completely unconstitutional. What is under the federal Constitution, what was the analysis that allows this?
Well, they were walking, several hundred yards into this 135-acre property. So acres and acres in, they actually installed on Terri's property 2 cameras. So one was installed about a few hundred yards after the gate. Then the officers continued to drive several hundred more yards down a private road that Terri owns until they reached a second tree, and then they installed another camera in that tree. So what they're relying on, I think, is this federal open fields doctrine. So there's a state statute in Tennessee that says that game wardens can snoop around your property without a warrant to enforce the state's hunting laws. And I think that the basis for that statute, the reason Tennessee thinks it can adopt a statute like that, is this federal open fields doctrine. And the point of this case is that we want to establish in Tennessee that doctrine doesn't apply.
So what was the rationale that said that private property isn't actually completely private when it comes to, an open field? Like, why is the piece of property being an open field no longer afforded the same constitutional rights as the portion of your property that's closer to your home?
There's kind of 2 bases for the open fields doctrine. The original one from a case called Hester in 1924 is that the Fourth Amendment protects persons, houses, papers, and effects, and that open fields don't fall into any of those categories. The second rationale is that open fields aren't subject or don't implicate any reasonable expectation of privacy for the property owner.
Is there a way that a person could make a larger portion of their property more private?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ways that Tennessee courts have recognized you could do that is by fencing your property and actually using it, which is exactly what's going on here. Terri has put a gate at the front of his property. He's put up no trespassing signs, and he's actively using the property, not just for living, but for farming and hunting.
So tell me how they found these cameras in the first place.
Well, the way they found them was by stumbling across them on their property. Terri's son was driving through their property. He noticed one camera hanging from a string in a tree, pointed across a field that actually looked at the back of their tenant's home. And then he kept driving, and he noticed a second camera, again, in a tree. But this wasn't the first time they had seen state officers on their property searching around without a warrant.
And so they found these cameras. I mean, I think a lot of other people would be freaked out. What was their reaction?
I mean, they were very disturbed. They felt invaded that government cameras were on their property, prying on their private activities that they didn't expect other people would be looking at or watching. Now, they weren't doing anything wrong. They're on their property farming, hunting, camping, using their property for all sorts of private purposes. But those aren't public, right? That's the whole point of having private property. And I should just add, Terry and his son, these aren't the first people in this area of Tennessee that have experienced this kind of intrusion. Their neighbors have also experienced the same thing, where Tennessee game wardens are entering their properties without a warrant and putting up cameras in trees.
There's nothing stopping game wardens from getting a warrant and doing this, right? But at least at that point, there's some judicial oversight.
Yeah, I mean, the way you would typically have it done is that any law enforcement officer would establish probable cause to believe that a crime was being committed, and then would go get a warrant from a judge and then search the property. And Tennessee game wardens aren't doing any of that here. They're treating private property, Terry's private property, as if it's public.
Okay, y'all, so there we've got it. You don't even have a right to privacy on your own
Justin. So
property.
We represent.
So y'all please leave me your comments below and let me know what y'all think. This is truly madness. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.